Hello everyone, here's my final presentation titled Forbidden Pages, the Battle of Banned Books in Public Education. Here's the table of contents outlining the topics of my presentation. This includes background information on book banning, 3 inequalities associated with banning books, and my references. So what is book banning? Book banning can be defined as the removal of books based upon the objections of a person or group over the book content. The methods of book banning can be removal from spaces, like libraries or schools, destruction, like burning, or made illegal to distribute. Key reasons for banning include concerns about morality, language, or violence, political or ideological disputes, or challenges to racial, gender, and LGBTQ representation. Here is some historical context on the history of banning books. Book banning dates back to American colonial times, with the first recorded banned book being Thomas Morton's New English Canon in 1637. Over the years, there have been various other books questioned or banned, though not on a large scale. A landmark Supreme Court case, Island Trees School District versus Pico in 1982, set a precedent for book banning in the United States by limiting the ability of school officials to remove books from libraries based on content. The ruling was 5 versus 4 in favor of the students. The court ruled that the First Amendment protects the right to publish and speak, and that this part of the Constitution limits the government's ability to suppress ideas and information. However, recent trends show a large uptick in book bans in the 21st century, with an explosion of bans and other legislation occurring from 2021 to today. The current topic of book banning is widespread across the United States and highly controversial. Since 2021, multiple state policies have been introduced and passed to regulate books in public schools, classrooms, and libraries. Texas House Bill 3979 restricts the teaching of concepts related to critical race theory and mandates balanced perspectives on controversial issues. Florida House Bill 1557, the Parental Rights in Education Act, also known as the Don't Say Gay law, prohibits classroom instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity from kindergarten through 3rd grade, which includes the use of certain books. Florida House Bill 1069 extends existing restrictions by prohibiting instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity from pre-kindergarten through 8th grade. It also enhances the responsibilities of district school boards regarding the selection and approval of instructional materials, including those in classroom libraries. Missouri House Bill 775 expands the definition of explicit sexual materials and imposes penalties on educators for providing such content. Iowa Senate File 496 requires all materials to be age-appropriate, a definition that prohibits any description or depiction of sex act. The law has been interpreted to ban books with any content related to sex or gender in books. It also contains Don't Say Gay copycat provisions censoring discussions of LGBTQ identities in the classroom. And most recently, Utah House Bill 29 enacts a statewide ban on certain books deemed to contain objective sensitive material, primarily relating to content deemed sexual. All of these laws represent a growing trend in the United States where state legislatures are increasingly passing measures that affect educational content, particularly around the teaching of controversial topics like race, gender, sexual orientation, and identity, which in turn impacts the availability of books in schools. While these laws do not always directly ban books, they create an environment that encourages the removal or restriction of books that are perceived as controversial or not in alignment with the state's educational framework. Further, the current Trump administration is supportive of the removal or legislation against certain books deemed inappropriate to have in public schools. The Biden administration had previously created a banned book coordinator to investigate the growing book banning crisis in the country, but as of January 2025, the position has been removed and all complaints related to book bans have been dismissed by the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, stating that the policies regulating books in schools does not violate civil rights laws and has called the whole issue a hoax. This chart is from PEN America, a nonprofit organization founded in 1922 that fights for the freedom to write advocates for free expression, and defends writers facing censorship or persecution. They collect and report on publicly reported data, primarily sourced from local journalists, school district websites, and school board minutes on topics of literature, with a heavy focus on book bans as they have risen dramatically in recent years. This graph shows the substantial jump in the number of banned books from the previous 3 school years, going from around 2,500 in the 21-22 school year to over 10,000 in the 23-24 school year, highlighting the crisis America is facing on this issue. Another graphic from PEN America shows the number of book bans per state in the United States as of October 2024. Florida, Iowa, and Texas are among the top 3 states, which were also among the states with state legislation discussed previously. So why is this a problem? Well, it is a large issue and greatly impacts public schools and students across the country. Firstly, the books being banned are disproportionately discriminating against books on and by marginalized groups. According to PEN America, of the banned books, 44% target BIPOC or Black Indigenous people of color, and 39% target LGBTQ content, characters, and authors. This restricts access to diverse perspectives, stories, and authors, and reinforces systemic biases by erasing marginalized voices from materials available to students and teachers. Further, this goes against Americans' First Amendment rights of free speech, press, and expression, and Title VI, which prevents discrimination based on race, color, or national origin in programs or activities that receive federal funding, meaning that public school book bans should not be targeting books that explore racial and cultural perspectives. This issue continues to be relevant today as there is a pending Supreme Court case titled Muhammad versus Taylor, a case brought by a group of parents in Montgomery County, Maryland, who sued the school district for the right to opt their children out of using certain books with LGBTQ topics in school that they argue are against their religious beliefs. This is further evidence of the broad educational censorship affecting public schools nationwide, leading to the countless book bans across the country that disproportionately discriminate against marginalized groups. Another reason banning books is a problem is because it is an act of censorship that then undermines culturally responsive teaching. Culturally responsive teaching is defined as an approach that aims to recognize, respect, and integrate students' cultures, identities, experiences, and backgrounds into teaching and learning. It is a critical methodology that in itself is highly controversial due to the fact that it focuses on addressing issues of race, identity, and social justice within the classroom, areas that white supremacists do not want taught or discussed in the classroom. Culturally responsive teaching is a deep pedagogy, but one important aspect is the implementation of diverse, historically accurate, and affirming books and materials. Schmidt and McKnight, 2012, highlight the impact textbooks have on the quality of a student's education, and the same can be applied to all books used in the classroom. Book bans directly attack BIPOC and LGBTQ books, restricting diverse texts that educators need to be culturally responsive to affirm the lives of their diverse student populations. Book bans, as they heavily focus on books addressing marginalized communities, prevent students from learning about and discussing societal issues and systemic problems plaguing the United States, largely related to racism, systemic oppression, and the unequal access to rights for LGBTQ and diverse people. Lastly, book bans disproportionately affect low-income public school students. These students are already facing systemic challenges due to reduced funding and limited access to educational resources. Often from communities of color, these students are further restricted by book bans, which limit the types and quantity of materials available to them for learning. This exacerbates the educational gap between students of color and their white peers. Low-income, predominantly BIPOC schools tend to have fewer financial resources, resulting in fewer opportunities for students to engage with diverse and comprehensive educational content. In contrast, wealthier students, who typically attend schools with more resources, have greater access to banned materials, resulting in a higher quality education. This systemic inequality, as Nultemeyer et al. 2012 discuss, has deep roots in the historical underfunding and segregation of schools serving low-income and BIPOC students, perpetuating a cycle of educational disadvantage. Book bans, therefore, not only limit access to critical educational materials, but also deepen the disparities in educational outcomes, further widening the achievement gap. Here is a summary of the references I used to gather the information for this presentation. And here are the references for the photographic images used in this presentation.